Carried. Okay, moving to item 2, declaration of conflict of interest.
That's me.
Okay, I would say that Donna has declared. Thank you.
No problem.
3, approval of minutes. The minutes of the Watershed Floodplain Subcommittee meeting dated October 5th, 2021 were subsequently approved at Public Advisory Committee meeting dated November 25th, 2021. So that does not need to be approved. We do not have correspondence on item 4, which takes us to our presentations under 5. Our first presentation is by WSP Steve Van Heron, I believe. Read the summary of the Beaver Creek and Big Forks Creek draft hydrologic analysis. I will pass this on to you, Steve.
You're muted, Steve.
He's not muted, but we can't hear him. It worked earlier, of course.
Not the only one. Thank you, Steve.
Maybe while Steve is
this better? Can you hear me now?
There you go.
There we go.
Oh, perfect. Okay, I think I found the setting. Sorry about that. Steve Miller, I just wanted to confirm, is there any preamble you needed to do before I jumped into my presentation? Or
no, all I wanted to do was let the subcommittee know that we have our engineering consultants with us, WSP, Mr. Steve Van Heron, and his fellow compatriot, Mr. Albert Zuge, who have been working on undertaking the necessary hydrologic and hydraulic analysis for this project. They're here to give us an update and to answer any questions you might have. So without further ado, Steve, I turn it over to you.
thank you. So as Steve mentioned, my name is Steve Van Heron. I'm the manager of the Land Development Resources Group here at WSP. Albert is my colleague, and he's my project manager and technical lead for this particular study. And we're here to present to you our summary of our progress with respect to the hydrologic study, which is a major component of the overall production of the floodplain maps for Beaver Creeks and Big Forks Creek. So we're neck deep in the overall process, and we've completed the hydrologic analysis, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about that process, what we've done, what our results are, and what our next steps are to complete and ultimately arrive at the floodplain mapping. So I'm going to give you an overview of the overall process. I'm going to share results with you and the summary, and then, as I said, give you the next steps at the end of my presentation. Try to keep this short and fairly high levels. I don't want to get too much into the weeds of the overall process, but if there is any questions, we're happy to entertain them and hopefully address them to your satisfaction. So hydrology is the process of measuring the land, evaluating its, what exists on the land, and put in place an estimate of exactly how that system is going to respond to precipitation events, particularly the major ones, such as the 100-year storm, which is our regulatory event. We use that in order to estimate peak flow rates in watercourses and any other points of interest in an effort to reliably predict how these systems will react in the future, so that we don't have a situation like I'm showing in the picture on the left-hand side. The whole point is to reliably estimate where the hazards are from this type of event and put in place at least the knowledge that if there are assets and properties at risk from that type of event, that the people and properties and interests associated with it are at least informed by that particular approach, so that we don't have to react like the situation that's shown on the screen any more than is absolutely necessary. So it usually results in a lot of computer time, particularly in this case, especially when you get to complicated water courses and large ones with very large areas, such as Beaver Creek and Big Forks Creek. the idea is that these computer models are well developed and calibrated, and they can reliably replicate systems that have happened in the past and show us that they match to a large degree with predictions versus measurements. So Beaver Creek and Big Forks Creek are two large systems. We have, as you can see, about 62 and 140 different catchments inside these things, inside the overall watersheds of these creeks. And each of those catchment areas has an average drainage area of about 116 or 122 hectares respectively. That covers a lot of ground. And as a result, you really need that computer system with a good model calibration and the technical expertise behind it to ensure that you have a system here that you can rely on when you're going to start putting on flood mapping that is going to affect people's property. So we want to ensure that that system is providing those, as I said, those real predictions that are reliable, and we do that with a calibration process. We rely on historic rainfall records and stream flow measurements to give us something to measure against. So the longer we have those records for, the more realistic those predictions can actually be. And then we want to ensure that we're doing this according to industry standard approaches that related to that process to ensure that if we were to be challenged on those particular approaches that we've used and our recommendations for the people and property in these very important watersheds, that we can hold up and be proud of the process that we've used in order to ensure that we are respecting everybody's interest in these important areas. So that's our overall process. Now our progress is what I'm going to go into next. So as identified by those standards, we have a very standardized process to come up with our overall calibration of our model. And so we use this process. I'm not going to go into all the details on this, but I want to reassure this committee that this process is standardized and it's iterative. Once we have established our overall modeling process, we estimate run-up values, all these like CN numbers, the time of concentration, all these other data points that go into this computer model to ensure that we start with a realistic initial approach for the modeling of those catchment parameters. But then we have an iterative process that we go back and forth on this system to adjust things until they come as close as they possibly can to recorded values. And once we have done that, we go through this model validation process to arrive at a final model. And that's really what we're going to use in order to put the information into the next step, which is the hydraulic model, which actually produces those floodplain maps. So as you can appreciate, we have large areas to consider. We have a lot of those delineations in there. Each one of those surrounded by a black line is a water subcatchment delineation, and each one of them has a land use associated with them. So we use a lot of GIS data sets. We use a lot of topography, like contours and topography data sets from a lot of different sources, and we rigorously test them, we check them to ensure that they're actually measuring something that's physically on the ground, not just an extrapolation of it or a projection, but something that's actually there so that we can say that at this point in time, this represents a very good representation of how this system will respond to those regulatory events. We also have done it for both. Beaver Creek was on the previous one, and Big Forks Creek is a little bit larger, so we have a couple of different areas, but I wanted to show you that we've characterized the entire watershed system that drains to those locations to accurately represent what is going on the ground. Okay. And then ultimately, we have to match that up with data sets representing our recorded history of flow rates and rainfall measurements. So we have a number of different locations that are available to us, and we have to look at them. The biggest issue that we have in these particular hydrology studies is that the amount of rain and water level data that we have is a bit limited. We have these NPCA stations as well as the ACS stations available to us, and they have between 7 and 16 years of available data. That's a little bit on the low side. And as a result, we testing that system to find out how well it correlates to the observed projections that we have. And as I said, the longer set of data that we have, the more reasonable it is to predict what kind of response we're going to get and how well it matches with the observed data. So we were able to come up with systems that quite closely resemble. In other words, the green is our predicted response from the model, whereas the brown is our observed, model measured is the opposite. Green is measured, my mistake, and brown is modeled. And you can see that relates to the precipitation records that we have and how this system responds. So there's generally good agreement. We believe that the calibration actually came up quite close. The problem is our validation. Our validation, which is an independent event, was supposed to predict or be quite close based on this whole process. And we're showing that it's just a little bit outside of our targets based on our standards that we use for this process. The points that were outlined in red are the sort of guides that we have to say when we are within acceptable limits on the validation process and the calibration targets. And we're showing that the systems are just a bit on the inconclusive side. That's really what the results are here, is that our limited rainfall data set that we have for Big Forks Creek is showing that our model calibration is providing inconclusive results. That doesn't mean we're stuck in the water. Like we have a method to get to it, and that's what the recommendation talks about in a minute. And as far as Beaver Creek, where the data just isn't actually possible with what we have, because it's just not quite to the level that we can actually reliably use. So we have a workaround. And that workaround is to use the flow rates in the Welland River from the previously approved hydrology report. That has, as I said, I haven't said it yet, but that has 57 years of historic data. So we can use that to create a 100 years regulatory event that is calibrated for the Welland River and use that to extrapolate back into Beaver Creeks and Big Forks Creek based on what we call a multiplier. And that gives us the new flow rates at the various flow nodes that provide that reliable estimate of the flow nodes at each one of those locations, because we know that once they get to the Welland River is established a measured flow rate. We'd prefer to do it the original way, where it's based on actual measurements from inside the watercourse drainage area. But when you don't have that length of data, you have to look for this kind of approach. And so we have that workaround available to us, and that's what we're going to, through discussions with our technical advisory committee, have agreed that this is the right approach to move on to the next stage, which is going to be our movement towards the completion of the hydrology study, which we have done. And we are now in the process of constructing our hydraulic model, which is going to provide that technical and analytical process to establish what the flood lines are in each of the Beaver Creek and Big Forks Creek watersheds that then result in the overall flood mapping products that which will be very, very similar in detail, similar in quality as to what we have previously provided for the Welland River, just applied to those particular watersheds. And that's really, once we have those, then we can start to identify those areas that are at risk of flooding and flood risk in that regulatory event, and therefore how we notify those particular landowners and deal with the consequences of those flood risk identification steps. Okay, we anticipate that we will get to that point in approximately sometime in autumn of 2022. Hopefully earlier, maybe about mid-autumn, sometime September, late September, October, but definitely around that time we anticipate having something to show to the overall committee with respect to draft flood lines. Hopefully I didn't go too fast. That's pretty much the end of my slides. I didn't want to take more time than I had available to me, but hopefully that provided a decent overview of our process, or progress to date, and what our next steps are. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. Carrie, can I ask you to carry any questions or identify if there are any questions, if there is anyone?
Sure, Jackie, happy to do that. The only message I have so far is Chair Foster has left. Otherwise, does anybody else have any other questions?
Oh, I do.
Donna. Go ahead,
Hi.
Donna.
Thanks, Steve. That's a great presentation.
Thank you.
it's an urban drainage model. So what proportion of those watersheds are actually urban?
Urban here is versus rural isn't really intended as a specific applicable only to urban versus rural. Any hydrologic model uses different, let's put it this way, different parameters to represent urban versus rural catchment areas. So in other words, there are different subroutines encoded into the model such that if you have a farmer's field versus say a school playground or a shopping mall parking lot, how those systems behave differently. In other words, we have something called different hydrograph responses based on those kinds of things, that it represents urban characteristics versus rural characteristics. And so I wouldn't put any specific attention into that study about urban hydro. Like I think you're picking up on the title of the standards that we're using for urban hydraulic modeling, or sorry, hydrologic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly
so
it. It
I'm
covers
not-
the rural as well.
Yeah. So again, so the infiltration rates are different, right? And the soil types
Right.
are different. And
That's right.
and right. So how small an area does it calculate it on? I know that we have a hard time in agriculture coming up with decent hydraulic models for where water flows.
Right.
It's better with our LiDAR data. It's better with a few different models, but it's still just a model.
Right. No, absolutely, and that's the whole point of the calibration process, the verification process, is to show that what you've constructed actually is presenting results that match what's observed in the field. And if you can't do that, you have to go back to the drawing board and keep modifying it until you get to something that is that you do, like that the industry standards has shown you is acceptable. If you can't, then it's called non-convergence, and that's a little bit of what we have in this case, because we don't have enough data from the length of the historic record to show that convergence. That's why I said it's a bit inconclusive with respect to the system. So we have to find another way to move on from that perspective if we can't use the data sets that we have, because there's just not enough there. So that's what we talked about with our technical advisory committee.
Yeah. So my next question, Chair Oblak, is regarding the data sets. I worked with the Soil and Crop Improvement Association for a number of years, and I know that there are farmers with very large data sets that were compiled that are like 30 years worth of history of rainfall data all over Niagara North and Niagara South. I know that data set exists, and I would encourage the Conservation Authority to get a hold of some better data sets that are out there, because they exist. So I always get frustrated when people don't use it.
Thank you, Donna. I actually am going to add my 2 cents worth, and this is something that in a previous life I had the same discussions. There's always the consideration of data quality, and that was always brought forward as being the reason for not utilizing this type of data. I've always suggested that it be at least considered and mapped, because my personal experience is that sometimes that's the only data that's available. And so you may not be hitting 100% on, what the actual result is, but you can see when there are events, and you can often see the trends as well throughout both the event and in the longer term. So just my 2 cents worth is that they are worth taking a look at, those secondary data sets. Okay, I'll pass back to Carrie. Anyone else?
Any other questions for Steve?
I have a question.
Oh, Joe's got a question. Go ahead, Joe.
Is there existing floodplain mapping for either of these areas?
No, that's the whole reason behind this system, is that we had it for the main Welland River, but the tributaries and so on are areas that were flagged for further study. This is one of those further studies. So that's really what the intent here is. Steve, any comment?
Okay, so
Yeah, if I could kindly jump in through you, Madam Chair. The main channel of Big Forks Creek was floodplain mapped back in 1989. But just the main channel. Big Forks Creek drains most of Waynfleet and the eastern part of Haldeman. So we're looking to radically expand that whole floodplain mapping process. There was nothing north of the Welland River on Beaver Creek. There's no floodplain mapping with that. And I just want to, when we talk about data, I just wanted to kind of circle back. The flows that we're using in Big Forks Creek and Beaver Creek, they were generated from a previous exercise, like Steve had mentioned. We used the Caster Center gauge on the Welland River. That gauge is owned and maintained by Water Survey Canada. 57 years of data. It is the Cadillac of stream gauge stations. It was the use of that, the information there, that we generated the storms, that we were able to both accurately calibrate and validate the flows coming from coming through the Welland River and spilling into it. So, you know, don't I want to leave this committee with the I don't want to leave the committee with the impression that, you know, we've got kind of wonky data. We've got through previous study Welland River stuff that both Steve and Albert did. We have some solid flows coming out of those two watersheds, and we use those flows at the mouth of Beaver Creek and Big Forks Creek to basically calibrate the stuff running through the watershed in both Big Forks and Beaver. We'll just leave it at that. Oh, I should mention the reports. Both the reports that Steve talked about, they're up on the project website. They're in draft. Folks, we encourage folks to go take a look at it, and any questions, you know, after this meeting or at any time, feel free to contact me, and we'll get to that a little bit more in my presentation.
And thank you, Steve. I think that speaks well to that there's important expansions of the information presented here that you provided. But I think to Donna's question earlier, I think the details on how the rural responses to the hydrologic simulations, all of that data is in there, exactly how we dealt with the rural aspects versus the urban areas. Okay.
Thank you.
There's another question. Somebody has their hand up.
Yeah, it looks like member Halinga has his hand up.
Thank you. And through the chair, a lot of data does provide a lot of benefit. However, when it comes to rainfall events and intensity and durations, they're changing with the climate influence. And I think the more recent data is much more valuable than historic data before we had such an impact from climate change. So just my own observation, my own opinion.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have any other comments or questions? No? We're good, Carrie?
It looks like you're covered here. Yep.
Okay, thank you. I do have a question, I guess, to follow up on Mr. Halinga's comments there. Does the data that you do have capture any events that might be used for are useful for taking a look at projections in the future? You know, as we all know, certainly projections do call for events, and trips do tend to respond differently from your larger rivers. Is there anything that's available there, or is there a way to count for what types of projections there might be for us locally?
Maybe I'll take a crack at this, Madam Chair. Part of this study, once we get the 100-year floodplain stuff nailed down, part of it is to look at, what would happen if the storm, the 100-year storm, was more severe, 20% more severe. What would be the impact to the flood lines? So yes, there is at the end a component of this, looking at kind of trying to quantify the magnitude of impact as a result of increasing precipitation. So that's coming.
Good. So that's just further down the process.
Yes.
I haven't looked at the studies yet, so thank you very much for that answer. Okay. If there are no other questions or comments, then we will move on with the paperwork. We're looking at recommendation number WFSC 02-2022, moved by Dion and seconded by Joe, that the presentation by WSP re-summary of the Beaver Creek and Big Forks Creek draft hydrologic analysis be received. Any opposed? Assuming none, that is carried. We will move on to your presentation, Steve Miller. Please go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to say thanks again to Steve Van Heeren, Albert Suge. Appreciate it. Okay, let's share the screen here. Okay, folks, can we see that?
Yes.
All good,
Yes.
Steve.
We're good? Okay. Okay, folks. What I want to do is, on the heels of the work that WSP has just done, we want to take that and introduce it to the public. So let's talk about the next steps, the next point of public engagement, and how we're going to tell folks about it.
Sorry to interrupt you, Steve. It just looks like we're seeing your the the presentation where it comes up two different screens.
Yeah.
Like with the next slides and everything. So this might make it a little bigger for folks if it's the other way around.
Okay. How's that, Carrie?
It's still the same, like where it shows the next slide and everything is still there. It's fine. I can see it okay. I don't know if anybody else is having any. There you go.
Is that better?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, let's just get that out there. Okay, so of course, and just to recap, a good friend, Beaver Creek, major tributary of the Welland River, located north of it, draining most of West Lincoln, confluencing with Welland River around Wellandport. The lines in red are the major branches that will be provided floodplain mapping. About 74 kilometers of watercourse will be mapped. And heading south of the Welland River, we see our good friend Big Forks Creek. The lines in red are the watercourses to be mapped. 110 kilometers, draining most of the township of Waynfleet, and again, confluencing with the Welland River just between Wellandport and the Pelham Port. So our first point of engagement was back in September 2021. We held our first public engagement session. It was virtual in this COVID world. And the project, the point of the engagement session was to introduce the project to the public and answer questions and listen to folks tell their stories about their experiences with flooding. They're the ones that live in the watershed. They're the ones we want to hear from. So a lot of good questions were asked. With that, a bunch of questions and comments were sent into the Conservation Authority. and we were able to really kind of put things into context. I should mention that absolutely no technical work was undertaken until this first public engagement session, until we introduced the project to the public. The second point of contact on this project was back in April of this year. The Township of Waynfleet held their annual public meeting about their talking about their municipal drains, their proposed maintenance program, and answering any questions. If folks are new to the area, municipal drain is kind of a unique beast that if you're not used to them, it has its own little nuances. So as part of that, the township at that meeting asked if the Conservation Authority would come and present give a little presentation on the floodplain mapping project happening across most of Township of Waynfleet. Of course, we were pleased to accept, came, made a presentation, talked about the project, talked about our floodplain policies, and answered any questions from the public. That one, no more. This one wasn't virtual. This one was in person, and no, it was a lot of good feedback, a lot of good questions. So that's a segue. Here, we're ready to chat with the public again. We want to present the results of the hydrology report that that Steve had talked about. We want to give folks a chance to listen to the Conservation Authority's floodplain policies and give them an update, because those policies, they're in the process of being updated or revised, and we'll talk a little bit about that at this meeting. We want to talk about the next steps in the project and let folks answer questions. We're going to be at the Wellandport Community Center, venue we've used many times before. We'll have a board set up. Folks will circulate. There'll be coffee, Timbits, that kind of thing. So it was worked well for us in the past, especially when we did the Welland River stuff. It was a good venue that we're going to use the same facilitator, Glenn Pothier. So we're looking forward to that. June 22nd, Wednesday night, 6 to 8. What I wanted to do now is to talk about the media campaign, how we're going to promote this public engagement session. And this is the crux to it. I really want to get the feedback from this subcommittee. And if ultimately, at the end of the day, whatever form that media campaign takes, really looking for the subcommittee to endorse that media campaign. After I go through what I've got planned, I'd be pleased to take any questions or suggestions. So let's get into it. The first thing you're going to notice is the campaign that we undertook for the first public engagement session was very successful, and that was part of that. There was good feedback from the subcommittee. We're going to be doing basically the same thing. So print, classic print stuff. Niagara This Week, Port Colborne Leader, Farmers Monthly, Grimsby Lincoln News. That this, of course, this ad will be revised. This was the old one for last September's meeting, but that's going into these the publications about a week or two before the June 22nd meeting. Direct mailouts. The we had originally anticipated sending postcards to folks living within 300 meters of the watercourses, but one of the recommendations of the subcommittee was just send it out to the entire township. Just send it out, both Waynfleet, West Lincoln, and we're sending it out to the eastern portion of Haldimand County. It was a good suggestion, and there was a lot of we got a lot of good responses, a lot of emails, a lot of comments as a result of that. Over 12,000 project postcards will be sent out. So we like to engage with our municipal partners. This worked out well last time. The date of that June 22nd, that'll be on the municipal community calendars. Not only that, we will send either a memo or a postcard to senior staff in all three municipalities, Waynfleet, West Lincoln, and the County of Haldimand, and the municipal councilors. So we're going to make the public officials, the councilors, the mayor, aware of this meeting and invite them to attend. As part of that, the postcard and the print media, the social media, will send folks to our project webpage. On that project webpage, you'll see on the right-hand side the hydrology reports for Beaver Creek and Big Forks Creek are already posted. They're already up there. Folks are welcome to download them, read them, and come to the meeting bearing questions about the content, what's in that report. After the public meeting on the 22nd, it won't be recorded. No, we're not going to record that public meeting, but what we're going to do is post the presentations, WSPs and the conservation authorities. That'll be posted on this website, so folks can get a chance, if they missed the meeting, go back and take a look at the presentation, see what they missed. In addition, the conservation authorities' social media, our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts will be promoting the meeting in the days running up to it. So after the second public engagement session, WSP, of course, will continue their technical work. Like Steve said, they're gunning to get the draft hydraulic report and the associated draft floodplain maps into the Conservation Authority's hands by September, October. We go through them. Once the steering committee is satisfied with it, then we'll present those findings to the Watershed Floodplain Subcommittee, much like we did tonight. Give a chance to ask questions. And then at that next meeting, I'll present a summary of the second public engagement session to the subcommittee, and I'll present the proposed media campaign for the third public engagement session, where we'll be taking the draft maps out to the public. So at the end, subject to any amendments or any recommendations, the Conservation Authority will be seeking the Watershed Floodplain Subcommittee's endorsement of the media campaign supporting the second public engagement session. And that's my presentation. I'll be pleased to take any questions you might have. Let me stop sharing the screen.
Thanks very much, Steve. It sounds like you have things well covered. Okay, Carrie, again, I'll pass it to you for questions, please.
Let me just get my tech in order. Okay, we stopped sharing.
I don't see any questions yet. Does anybody have any questions for Steve?
And folks, it's a lot to take in. You have my number. You're sitting, tomorrow, the next day, hey, I just thought of this. By all means, feel free to give me a call.
Sorry, can I just say something? Thanks for taking our input, Steve, and making it work. It sounds awesome, and I appreciate that it was extra effort to do that. So thank you.
No, my pleasure. And I thank this subcommittee. This is the whole point, right? To bounce these ideas, and your groups, the folks you hang out with, how best to reach them, and that's your resource, and I'm more than happy to use it.
Great, thank you, Steve.
Thanks,
yeah,
Donna.
Definitely, I think that the more people that are aware of this, the better. Definitely. So you're covering all bases, I believe. Any other comments, questions? We're good, Carrie?
I don't see any other questions at this time, Jackie.
Okay, then on to the paperwork. Thank you. Recommendation number WFSC 03-2022, moved by Donna and seconded by Erica, that the presentation by Steve Miller, floodplain mapping public engagement session number 2 media campaign be received. Any opposed? Assuming none, carried. Okay, now we do have a delegation, and I will open the floor to questions from Lynn. Please go ahead, Lynn.
Hi everyone. I've got Bev Leopard here, and myself, Lenny Arts. We're from the Floodplain Association. We wanted to be part of, I guess, the whole process here, and you've watched the last of what happened last fall too, and we actually made our association. If nobody knows us, this happened with the Welland River, when the floodplain came in the Welland River. So Beth's got a little introduction here to who we actually are.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Bev Leopard. Len is lurking here in the background, as you can see. We just wanted to participate in this process. For those of you who might not know, most of you probably don't know who we are or why we might be interested in this. We have a fairly long involvement in the floodplain mapping process in the Welland River watershed. It goes back to as early as 2011, when the Conservation Authority were remapping the main channel of the Welland River, and it really didn't go so good. The initial effort, and the draft proposal was for over a meter increase, a huge increase in the floodplain zone, and we just couldn't understand how that it must be poor data or poor engineering or both. And to boot, the whole thing had been done without any public consultation or communication with the public. So at that time, we raised our concerns to the board and others, and the board initiated a review. One of the things that happened at that time was the earlier version of your committee here was struck. In fact, I found in some paperwork here, I don't know, I'm going to hold it up and everybody can see, but there's a ad that came in the local paper soliciting members of the public to join the Welland River Floodplain Review and Implementation Committee, which was the predecessor to your committee, I believe. And so several members of our group sat on that committee, and eventually the committee and the general board realized that the public had no confidence in the draft study, what was known as the 2010 study of the Welland River. So in response to that, there was a decision to shelve that report. There was a new RFP issued, new engineering consultants were engaged, and most importantly, I think there was a new commitment to public consultation and communication that did not previously exist. And the study was redone over a period of years. And in contrast to the early confrontational and adversarial relationship that seemed to be existing between the NPCA and the public at that time, the second attempt, which eventually led to the successful completion of the project and by acceptance by the public. So we have seen and experienced the good, the bad, and the ugly of the local floodplain mapping. And, we just feel very strongly that there is the wrong way to do it, and then there's the correct and right way to do it. I mean, you can use lousy, poor, incomplete data and unproven modeling and shoddy engineering practices and poor or no communication and consultation. Or the correct way, of course, is to use accurate and complete data and proven and widely accepted modeling and good engineering practices from experienced engineers, and a thorough and complete public and consultation and communication process. And, of course, the The wrong way might be fast and cheap and easy, but in the right way may be more time consuming and more expensive and much more work. But we feel very strongly that that's the right way. And so we wanted to join and be engaged in this process. We originally asked to officially join the group. Now that we're back doing the project in more or less our community, our neighborhood of our members of our association and those people who support us. We're told that that's not technically possible, so we can participate in some capacity as guests, which is fine. But our goal is to monitor and encourage and ensure that the project is completed in the proper and correct way. And you know, we've been monitoring the other smaller projects over the last couple of years in St. Catharines and in Grimsby, and you know, we're pleased that the template, more or less, that we help to encourage the group to adopt is being more or less followed, from what we can tell, and that bodes very well for a good product. You know, and it might seem obvious I certainly don't mean to have anyone feel insulted to suggest that this process could be anything other than the top quality process. And it might seem obvious that that's the way to go. But you know, we're hearing disturbing and concerning comments and issues that are coming out of various sources, that the public consultation issue and the consultation is not really necessary, for example. And we're very concerned by that, and we definitely want to urge this group to resist any suggestions that you know, the public's opinions or the public involvement are somehow not important. And so we are wanting to be involved in this. We feel we have something that we can add from our experience on the Welland River. We've been on this for over 10 years. For those people who might have, I know Steve Miller is familiar with our involvement in it. And in terms of the presentations that there have been earlier, we did have some questions, but really wasn't sure if that was appropriate for us to ask them at that time. But to Steve Van Haren, I guess our concerns would be that when you say that the data sets are pretty limited, and that the validation is not really happening because of that limited information. I mean, again, obviously, and I don't need to tell you, the more data you have, the more accurate and complete data set that you have, the better the process will be. And so we just would urge you to find any information that you can, the suggestions that some local farmers and others who may have been compiling data unofficially over the years may be valuable. I think that's something worth looking into. Anywhere that you can get some longer range, familiar with the Church Road site from by Caister Center that was central to the calculations on the Welland River project. So that's in the neighborhood at least, even though not on the sub-watersheds. So anyway, not necessarily looking for your response, but just a comment that find as much data as you can and use as much as you can to validate it as closely as possible. That's going to assist. That's going to improve the public acceptance of the project. And to Steve Miller, I think you've drank the Kool-Aid. I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to see it. For those of you who may recognize a card Steve had virtually, we feel that this is one that was one of the original ones that were sent out in the Welland River project, and the NPCA and others were, let's just say, we had some convincing to do to establish a robust public consultation process as has been established and is being used as a template now. We're very happy to see that. The cards, I think, we take much of the credit, I think, for making that suggestion back in the day, and that is the best mechanism, we feel. When that card lands on your kitchen table, people, they may or may not look on the website. They may or may not see something on social media or in the newspaper. But if that card lands on their kitchen table, if they don't bother participating, then that's their problem. You've done everything you can to engage them, and you're not going to get everybody, no matter what you do or no matter how hard you try, but you have to try your best, and that's what we're seeing, and it looks like that there's many bases that can be covered are being covered, so we're pleased to see that. So and we're also pleased that the sessions that Steve described for the Welland Port Hall are going to be in person. We strongly support any public health guidelines and requirements that have had to been in place over the last couple of years. But the meetings in person are superior to online meetings. So I think that that's the very best thing. The only thing we would suggest is double down and have a second meeting in Wainfleet. That would even be better. But definitely have an in-person meeting and take whatever necessary steps the public health recommends is fine. But let's do it, and let's have people who can actually go and see and hear people and speak to them and express their concerns and be listened to. It's much more difficult to do that virtually. So I don't think I have too much more that I would say. Our group is largely based in Wainfleet. Our members live and work and own property in the area, including in the study area, and we're watching this closely. And if the engineering is done with the best data available and the best modeling that's available, and the best engineering practices that are available, and if the public consultation and communication is as enthusiastic as possibly can be, then you're going to have a much, the final product is going to be much more widely understood and much more widely accepted by the public. And I said this before to the previous incarnation of this group, that if you do all that, then the public will accept it. And so I don't see why they wouldn't. If the template that's been established and the best practices are being followed, I think we should be good, and you won't hear too much complaint from us.
Wonderful. Well,
unless you don't, then you will.
well, thank you very much. It's obvious that you've had a huge influence on the way that NPCA is approaching this this whole process these days. So congratulations on that. Obviously, you took them down the right path, and hopefully we can continue to do so and work with Steve and well, Steve, I guess, and anyone else that is involved with these different projects. So I guess the next thing is that we will be hearing back, I imagine, Steve, from you eventually regarding how this public consult went and lessons learned and all the rest.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Wonderful. Look forward to that. I really think that that you're on the right path with all of this. And yes, there's going to be some challenges when it comes to data, et cetera, but it's why they pay you the big bucks, right? Okay, I'm here for the end of the meeting, kind of. I never could get the video going, but at least I am here. Thank you very much, folks, for your input on this, and we are going to move on in the agenda. We're looking at item 7, consent items, and I don't believe we have any. Item 8, discussion items. Recommendation to endorse the media campaign. Does anyone have any further questions or comments for Steve regarding the media campaign? Okay, I can actually say seeing none. We will move on with the recommendation WFSC 04 2022. Moved by Joe and seconded by Dion, that the Watershed Floodplain Subcommittee endorsed the media campaign for the second public engagement session of Big Forks Creek and Beaver Creek Floodplain Mapping Project as described in the presentation by Steve Miller. Any opposed? Excuse me.
Just one note, Jackie, Dion messaged me that he had to step out for a few minutes, so he's not here right now, so we should probably have a different seconder.
Okay, a different seconder. We'll put down Donna, please. You guys pop in and out, it's brutal. Yeah, I thought with the small group I could keep track, but obviously not. Okay, so Donna, you're good with that?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Any opposed? And seeing none, that is carried. We don't have any committee reports for item 9, no new business, so we're on to adjournment. Recommendation number WFSC 05 2022. Moved by Joe, seconded by Erica, that the Watershed Floodplain Committee be adjourned at 6:11 p.m. Any opposed? I'm supposed to ask that, aren't I? Okay, seeing none, that is carried. And thank you very much, folks, for your patience and for all the good information that we've collected on this meeting. And thank you, folks, for attending. And we will see the members of our committee soon.
Jackie, thank you for your perseverance through your technical difficulties and for continuing to chair in that difficult situation. It's really appreciated.
I guess it was just as well that the computer didn't go out the window. Maybe now it will.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thanks. Good night, folks.
Good night, folks.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks.